This is Brother Peter Diamond, vaticancatholic.com. A lawyer and a former high-ranking Freemason named John Salza recently authored an attack on the Sedevacantist position. It was called The Errors of Sedevacantism and Ecclesiastical Law. His article appeared in the false traditionalist publication The Remnant in the July 15, 2010 issue. On our website, we recently posted an article that refutes Salza's article in detail. It carefully examines his arguments and identifies his primary errors and distortions of Catholic teaching. It also takes some time to expose his distortion of canon law. The article also covers how, in the process of making his arguments against the Sedevacantist position, John Salza falls into numerous, massive contradictions. You will find a link to that article in the description of part 1 of this video. But I want to discuss some of the highlights and the main points in this video. First of all, it should be pointed out that this article that Salza authored was somewhat persuasive for certain people. We received some letters from a few individuals who attached Salza's article as if it constituted a total refutation of the Sedevacantist position. That's why exposing the massive problems with his article and refuting his arguments was necessary and important. I also want to say that on August 23, 2010, I challenged John Salza to a debate on the topic of Sedevacantism. This was before my article came out, and I sent him an email which stated, "Hi John, my name is Brother Peter Diamond. I'm a member of Most Holy Family Monastery. You're probably familiar with us or with some of our material. I was wondering if you would be interested in a recorded telephone conversation/debate on the issue of Sedevacantism, that is, whether Benedict XVI is the Pope. I realize that you consider Benedict XVI to be a valid Pope and that you believe the Sedevacantists are quite wrong. I think a conversation on this matter would be very valuable and interesting for people. Please let me know if you are interested. Thanks, Brother Peter Diamond." And this email was not only sent to his email address, but we sent the same email by certified letter. It was signed for at his address. To this date, we have not received any response to the debate challenge. And we believe that he's avoiding us because he's afraid to do it, and he realizes that his arguments would not hold up in such a debate. Moreover, he couldn't escape addressing the heresies of Benedict XVI, which absolutely make a mockery out of the position he holds, and completely refute any idea that Benedict XVI is a valid pope. Furthermore, since he actually had the audacity to call Sedevacantists, quote, empty heads, or say that they should be called empty heads, the fact that he's afraid to engage in a debate with us really speaks to his insecurity, his cowardice, and his inability to defend his position. Now, I want to move to summarizing the main problems with Salza's argument so that people understand how fallacious it is. Later on, I will get into his massive contradictions and show how, in the second half of his article, he actually denies his central argument. But let's now look at his primary error. In his article, Salza basically tries to draw a key distinction. At the beginning of his article, he admits that Canon 188.4 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law teaches that those who publicly defect from the faith lose their offices without any declaration. It's plain, it's clear, it's right in canon law, and this is the application of the principle that heretics are automatically expelled from the church and lose all authority within the church. So at the beginning of his article, to sort of pay lip service to this fact which no one can refute, he says that the Sedevacantists are right in asserting that this is the teaching of the divine law. Quote, Sedevacantists correctly maintain the divine law expels a formal heretic from the church without further declaration. They point to Canon 188, paragraph 4 of the 1917 Code, which says that, quote, all offices whatsoever fall vacant and without any declaration if the cleric publicly defects from the faith, end quote. But then he goes on to draw what he thinks is his key distinction. He says, quote, however, the same code of canon law also determines how we know a cleric has publicly defected from the faith and lost his office as a result of the defection. The Church tells us, end quote. So, as I explained in my article, he tries to insert this crucial distinction between number one, the fact that yes, a heretic does lose his office and is expelled from the church ipso facto without any declaration, and number two, but we must have a declaration from the church to know to whom this principle has applied. So yes, number one, heretics lose their offices without declaration, but he claims number two is the fact that the church must declare that someone falls into this category. This is his primary distinction in his article, one that he contradicts, as I will show later on, and one that I carefully refute in the article. And what's interesting about his article is that it's what I call intellectual black magic, because as you read this article, he starts out by admitting this principle, that heretics lose their offices without declaration. But then he goes through all of these involved arguments from canon law to create the impression that you need a declaration for all of it. And so the effect for the person who cannot see through its subterfuge is that he essentially turns on its head the principle that he admitted at the beginning. Without declaration turns into you must have a declaration. And by the end of the article, they've forgotten what he already admitted, that heretics lose their offices without any declaration. And I'm going to go through and expose the dishonest way in which he did this, and how in each case his arguments are false. So let's zero in on this second part of his claim, that we must have a declaration from the church to know to whom this applies. In other words, in order to identify that someone falls into this category of having lost his office without declaration, we need a declaration. Is that what the church teaches? We all agree it teaches number one, they lose their offices if they are in fact heretics. But does it teach number two, that we cannot know someone is a heretic and falls into this category where he has lost his office without declaration until the church declares it concerning him? No, it is not the church's teaching, as I will show. But the first thing I want to say, think about the logic of this argument. What would be the point of the church's teaching and the divine law, that heretics lose their offices without any declaration, if we must always wait for a declaration from the church to reject that individual? The teaching would be pointless, because in each case you would have to wait for the declaration. It would have no practical effect or ramifications whatsoever for the people who are subject to the heretic. So, refuting his principle number two, the second part of his distinction, I'm going to quote Pope Paul IV's bull, Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio, February 15, 1559. I'm just going to quickly summarize it. I'm not going to quote the whole thing. Salza also makes reference to this bull in his article. And as most people familiar with our material and this issue know, it teaches that the election of a heretic to the papal office would be invalid without any declaration. Okay, so it teaches principle number one, that we all agree, that heretics cannot retain or even be elevated to offices within the church. But it also refutes Salza's number two, because Pope Paul IV not only teaches that the heretic cannot have the office, that he would not be the pope, even if all the cardinals accept him, but Pope Paul IV also teaches that any and all persons who would have been subject to those thus promoted or elevated, referring to people who are elected as heretics, including the laity, quote, shall be permitted at any time to withdraw with impunity from obedience and devotion to those thus promoted or elevated, and to avoid them as warlocks, heathens, publicans, and heresiarchs. End quote. So Pope Paul IV completely refutes and destroys Salza's argument and his whole article and his key distinction, because he not only says, number one, that the heretic will not have the office because he can't, he's not in the church, but he says the opposite of Salza on number two, that Catholics, before any declaration has been made, can reject the heretic. So contrary to what Salza says, Catholics must wait for the declaration from the Church to determine who falls into this category. Wrong. Pope Paul IV completely refutes it by saying that prior to any declaration, Catholics can reject this person if it is clear that he's a heretic. That blows his whole argument out of the water, and I will go through more of his errors in the next part. And it's important to listen to the remaining parts because there are some massive contradictions and some deeper issues involved on which Salza truly stumbles. And in exposing them, we see the full extent of the deception that was involved in this article, as well as in those who obstinately adhere to the anti-pope and the counter-church.